Hey guys, welcome to another one of my author talks. This time I'm going to talk about a series, the Graham the Gargoyle series. It is 3 books, and the first book is free on Amazon on all platforms, and you can also find it on my YouTube site as a read aloud too. And it's called Graham's Grief. The second book is Flynn's Folly, and the third book is Ott's Ordeal. This is a series that's very near and dear to my heart because it was one of the first projects I created as a novel. And I wanted to exploit the idea of a changing expectation of taking a gargoyle, and you would assume that they would be very comfortable with being high up on a church tower, not afraid of heights at all, and then changing that expectation. It's kind of a brainstorming technique I teach my students to do when they want to create some interesting character dynamics. And so I have an idea that here's Graham, who is deathly afraid of flying. He thinks his wings are too small, and he just can't muster up the strength to be a successful flyer. And so I wanted to take that story and put it into the magical context, but also have it have real emotions that regular humans and children could relate to, because Graham's problems are very much what you would find in a regular school environment. He may go to a school that says level 5, but that's grade level 5 in our reality too. So Graham lives in the magical world of Cascade, and one of the things I wanted to do was create a world that would give me endless possibilities, and this one truly does that. It's the idea that when magical creatures lived in the mortal world, they were doing just fine until we stopped really believing in them. So as modern society took over with all the different things that we're focused on, concentrating on, we stopped believing in these magical creatures. And so they found that their magic was starting to fade away, that they actually were physically fading away, and their existence was threatened. So they realized if they moved to a different dimension and all started to believe in each other and interact with each other, that they would continue their existence because they could fuel their own existence, magically speaking, then. And so this opens up a whole lot of possibilities, that you have all the different myths and magical creatures, the magical creatures that are there to populate this world, and makes it very interesting, a great dynamic to explore. So the first book really, it has a very narrow focus of talking about Graham and his village, and the village of trolls that live next to the gargoyles. So they're very isolated. It's a very isolated story because I wanted it to be very small and personal. And Graham is trying to overcome his fears so that he can take his first flight at the end of the week. So it takes place during a week where there's lots of anxiety going on, because not only that does he have the pressure of trying to fly for the first time, but he's got his grandfather who is getting progressively harder and harder, because in this idea that there are gargoyles, I came up with the concept that when gargoyles get older, they get more solid. They become more like rock, so that they know that when they finally become completely rock, that they have passed on to the next level, or the next realm. And so when gargoyles do that, I have a tradition of going through a portal to go back to Earth and climbing a church. That's very respectable to do this. That they climb the church and they take a position. They become a stone gargoyle to guard that church and protect it from evil spirits. So Graham has to deal with his grandfather, who's about to do that and maybe won't make it to his first flight. He also has to contend with the fact that while he goes to a school of gargoyles, he has a friend, Ott, who's the only troll at the school, and Ott is treated very poorly by the rest of the gargoyles, especially Blord. And this story has a great deal to deal with, has a great deal of focus on bullies. And in this story, Blord is this big gargoyle that kind of causes lots of problems for Graham. And Blord is in and out throughout the story creating these problems, and it was a lot of fun to do, because Blord, at first, when I did this first story, I thought he was going to be a one-note character. He was just going to serve the role of the bully. But he didn't serve that role for long, because I found that in the second and third book I had to evolve his character. So the first book deals with Graham trying to overcome his first flight, dealing with the fact that his grandfather has to leave, and also dealing with the bully. At the same time, he's got this family that his mom is supportive, his sister is really supportive, but quite a ball of energy in terms of being a hyper smart student and a little younger than Graham. And then his father, who he's a little distant with. And one of the things I did was I always pull from my own life. And so a lot of the things that Graham encounters with his father and the difficulties of connecting with his father are things that I based on my own childhood, but evolved it to have the gargoyles act out these things. So Graham undergoes all these different things and has to take his first flight by the end of the book, and it ends on a real positive note, and there's all kinds of conflicts that get resolved. And then I thought the book was done. And as I started reading each year this book to my class, the different classes I had, it every time they were like, "This is such a good book. I'd like to see Graham again. Do you have any other stories with Graham?" So one year I sat down and said, "Well, yeah, I think I do have some more stories." And so Flynn's Folly was born from the idea that in the very first book it just mentions the flying mummy, who is kind of the Superman of this realm, and how he basically runs around and mans his own Justice League. He's got a bunch of magical characters that do good deeds throughout this realm, and the Flying Mummy serves as the Superman archetype. And Graham gets to meet his hero in the first book, and during that part, he reveals that Graham's grandfather was also part of that Justice League type team, and Graham's grandfather helped defeat Medusa, who wanted to make the Flying Mummy her husband. And so I just took that idea of the Medusa being maybe a plot that I could deal with and expanded it to become the second book. So Medusa comes back, and her intention is to make the Flying Mummy her betrothed, in a sense, to marry him again, whether he likes it or not. And so Graham and his family and Ott and Flan, they all get involved again. And it's kind of a mystery because it starts out with they find all these creatures in the nearby woods. They're turning up as stone statues, and they're like, "What's going on with this?" They also find out that the trolls in the village next to them are starting to fade away, and they realize that because the gargoyles and the trolls have isolated themselves from all the other creatures that in Cascade, that they have not given them enough belief to fuel their existence. So by the end of the story, they have to resolve the fact that they can't stay an isolated set of tribes or villages, just the trolls and the gargoyles staying off to themselves. So they have to interact with the rest of Cascade. And so they also have to defeat Medusa. And there's the really great scene with the Widow Stemmel, who becomes a major character in the second book. And it shows Graham interacting with a younger character, so that Graham interacting with an older character and the relationship of generations. And she kind of plays the role of Graham's grandfather in a different way for the second book. So I had a lot of fun writing that book, and it came together well. And it was neat because the first book was always told from Graham's point of view, third person. But the second book had chapters told from Graham's point of view, third person, and Flan, his sister's point of view, third person as well. So I like that idea that maybe if I did a third book, I could have a third character and a third point of view. And so I thought about where I'd left the characters in the second book, and I said, let's take them to a new setting because they can't stay in the village. So Graham's family is elected to be the ambassadors for the Gargoyle village, and so is Ott's family. And they relocate to New Asgard, which is this big, beautiful, magical city. It's all kinds of hustle and bustle, tons of different magical creatures and mythological creatures there. And Graham is going to be living there and going to a school that's devoted to all the different children of the ambassadors of the different species. And so this opens up a brand new concept because not only does Graham end up there, but Blord also goes to this school too. So Blord still becomes a thorn in his side in the second book, but in the third book you start to see the reason behind why Blord is such a bully. Graham starts to get to know him a little bit better, and while they're not the best buds, there is evolution to Blord's character so that he's not this detestable bully that he was in book one. There's all kinds of different magical creatures, magical capers going on in the third book, and what I like about the progression in this series is that it starts with a small story, very intimate, very personal. The second book expands the world. The third book expands it even further. And one thing I forgot to mention about the second book is it takes on a new perspective on the harpies in the world. And we always think of harpies as these filthy bird creatures that are half women and half bird. And I kind of dispelled that because Larone is the harpy in this story, and does not fit that stereotype at all. She's definitely showing that there is something behind every species. Shouldn't be pigeonholed in a sense, that the harpies are more than just this one note idea of these evil hags in a sense. So Larone's story really spoke to the readers in the second book, and she kind of corresponds with Flan throughout the third book. And all these books tell completely self-contained stories. My intention has always been to go back to do the fourth book and the fifth book and continue expanding the world even more and the points of view. And the fourth book would have dealt with Larone's lament, and one of these days I'm going to go back to it and get that book taken care of. And the fifth book would be Blord's blunder, and so or Blord's burden, excuse me. And those are kind of on tap for down the road, and they would kind of complete the 5-book saga. And then eventually I'd like to tell a story that kind of maps out different characters that you've met. Like, I'd love to do a story completely about the Flying Mummy and what he does as a kind of a Justice League type leader in this magical world. Anyway, right now, all 3 books are available as ebooks in terms of across all the different platforms available online. There currently is not a print book, but my hope is that in the next few months, I can take all 3 of the books and put them into one big omnibus of all 3 Graham stories in one print book. I'm kind of working on putting that project together right now. But Graham is a project that is near and dear to my heart. While when you hear it, it sounds like it might be a children's book. It's very much like a Pixar movie in that it has levels and complexities that the adults would appreciate. It has the emotional core of it being a coming of age story and overcoming the fears and hurdles that are associated with coming of age too. So I hope you give it a chance. It's called Graham the Gargoyle, and the first book is Graham's Grief. The second book is Flynn's Folly, and the third book is Ott's Ordeal. And thanks for listening. Take care.